Welcome back to Conversations with Boston School Psychologists, building safe and supportive schools one conversation at a time, where we spotlight the people, practices, and partnerships behind behavioral health and school psychologists in Boston Public Schools. We're honored to welcome Dr. Ivonne Borrero, Assistant Director for the Behavioral Health Services team. As a bilingual school psychologist, Ivonne brings both professional expertise and personal commitment to her work. Her leadership also extends to championing English language learners and their families, ensuring that language and culture are strengths, not barriers, to accessing behavioral health supports. Beyond her advocacy, Ivonne plays a critical role in developing and mentoring Boston school psychologists, helping them expand beyond the traditional roles to become leaders in school climate, equity, and student well-being. Ivonne, thank you so much for joining us today. It is so nice to have you here. And today we're going to be talking about your journey, both your passions and your reasons for why you became a school psychologist, as well as your journey into leadership and your work with multilingual learners. So why don't we get started with the very beginning? What led you to school psychology in the first place?
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
I always wanted to be a teacher. So for me, education has always been my passion, right? I became a teacher. My first degree, my bachelor's, is in education and psychology. But with just psychology, I couldn't really do much. So I decided to just pursue a master's and a doctorate in clinical psychology. But my program included school psych. Right. So it was a multi-year degree. And that's when I really got into, I like this. I want to figure out how students learn and what else I could do for students as a teacher, but from the school psych lens. And I worked for 6 years as a teacher while I finished my degrees. And that was fascinating to me. Right. I loved the school environment. I loved being in education. I worked in Puerto Rico for about 20 years before moving to Boston. When I got here, I realized I was treated as an immigrant because, I have an accent, I didn't look like the people here, but I am an American citizen. And so it was interesting that I now started to defend my students, right? Because I was hired as a bilingual Spanish-speaking psychologist, and then my work started to be that of advocacy for my families. My students were being treated as students with disabilities just because they didn't speak English. And how did I speak English when I was just like them? So all of those things really brought me into, I need to do more. And that's how as a bilingual school psych, I really started to think, besides doing assessments, I needed to do more for my families, for my students. And that's how I really developed this passion.
And why don't you get more into that? So how did you go about supporting multilingual learners, their families in the Boston Public Schools?
So besides doing assessments, which was my main job, I did a lot of work with families, just educating them on their rights and what they needed to understand before signing the paper. Because many times you get teachers to say to families, your kid needs help. Right? And sign here and I'm going to get you help. Well, what does that mean? Right? When you sign a consent form for an assessment, that really puts this child on a track that sometimes they can't get out of. Because once you're given a disability, it's like, where do we go from here? Right? And so I would really talk to parents before having them sign that, wait, we need to do interventions. Wait, we need to really understand that being bilingual or not knowing English doesn't make you disabled. Right. And so really helping parents find community partnerships to really understand, hey, there are resources in the community that can help your child learn English, that can really help you as a family understand that it's not a bad thing not knowing English, that you can survive here without that piece.
Were you seeing that there was an over-identification of children who had limited English proficiency being identified as disabled when in reality it might have been just simply been limited English proficiency?
Yes, very much so. And usually were the boys who were the most identified, right? Because then the boys couldn't communicate, they become restless, and then they were identified with behavior issues, right? So also helping parents understand that we've got to help these boys acquire language. Language is the key to success, right? So they could tell the teacher, I need to go to the bathroom, or I don't understand this problem. Can you help me? Right? Simple language skills to help the students navigate their classroom, right? So that was for me critical in helping the families.
And so you talked a little bit about your role as a school psychologist. Do you also want to talk about how, after you became a leader, an assistant director in Boston Public Schools, how you continued to help with things like over-identification and supporting multilingual learners as well as their families in Boston Public Schools?
Yes, so we've created a guidance document on the process of not just identifying English language learners, but the assessment of and interventions and family resources and family engagement. So it's over a 100-page document, but it contains everything you need to know to really set them up for success. So this is a document that we've worked with multiple departments, school leaders, school committee, the Office of Multilingual Learners, the Office of Academics, Early Childhood, all of these departments together to put together the best policies and procedures to really support families. And we've been very successful in really addressing the needs. It's been a challenge in getting all school leaders to follow them, right? Boston is a huge district, and we've got over 120 schools, and, we've got principal turnover and those kind of challenges that, we train a school and then the principal leaves and then we've got to start over, right? But I think educating teachers, right, because that's the foundation of it all, and helping them understand, that's a step forward.
Absolutely. So we're going to get now into the opportunities as well as the challenges of supporting multilingual learners. And I think just broadly, if you could go over those different opportunities and challenges, and then I think we're going to get more into the specifics of practical tips we can give school psychologists, practical tips we can give teachers, and practical tips we can give to learners and families themselves. So why don't we just get into broadly, what are the unique opportunities and challenges with working with multilingual learners?
So challenges are that our buildings are like their own communities, right? So the school leaders, they reach out to the community partners on their own, but sometimes they don't know what they need, right? So I think that's a big challenge because we have so many resources here in the city, right? So for example, our libraries, they have programs for families to learn English. That's a great resource. But if you don't tap into them appropriately, then you're sending families there without really knowing where or what to do, right? We've got communities where, I'll give you, for example, the Mattapan community, where we have a Haitian Creole dual language school. That is a fantastic resource for our Haitian community. But you've got to send them there, right? You've got to tell them where to go, who to see, and who to connect with. You just can't send them there, right? Because some of our families, for example, the Vietnamese community, they have their own community. They have their own resource centers. So let's fund them. Let's send the books to them, right? So it's really a matter of having the right people connect, right? So our social workers are fantastic in doing that for us. So really we have a variety of social workers who speak the languages. So it's really that connection, that networking and helping us. So it's a challenge, but it's also an opportunity for us to really network.
That's wonderful. So some of the specific challenges that school psychologists have is sometimes a student will come into their school coming from a different country with limited English proficiency. Let's say maybe they have 1 year of exposure to the English language, and a teacher wants to refer them for a learning disability. What would you recommend school psychologists do or say to the teacher in that situation?
I think gathering information is key. where's the student coming from? What educational experience do they have? What does education look like in their country? Because we assume that people understand special education in a lot of these countries, right? So Puerto Rico, for example, where I come from, we do follow the educational guidelines of the United States, right? Because they are the ones, we're a commonwealth of the United States. Not all the countries, like Latin America, many of these countries don't have an IEP. They don't know what that is, right? So understanding that and understanding the school day is a simple thing to do. Tell me about your school day. What did you do in the morning? What did you go home for lunch, right? Because in Puerto Rico, many of our schools up in the mountains only go until lunch because we don't have a lunch program. So the kids go home after 4 hours of schooling and then they don't come back.
Which isn't enough.
Which is never enough, right? So really understanding that. I personally have made many calls to Chile, to Costa Rica, just to understand what was their curriculum. When did they start to read? Because many of these communities don't teach reading until maybe second grade, right? So then that's not a disability.
Yes. And so the educational background is important, but also talking with teachers about how long it takes to develop. How long would you say it takes to develop English proficiency? And I'm not talking just about social interactions, but also that cognitive and academic language proficiency.
Oh, about 5 to 7 years. And that's when you are in a good space, right? You don't have any trauma. You live in a safe space, right? Because many of our students are coming here fleeing countries, right? So they don't have, if they have trauma, it's going to take longer. If they're not housed appropriately, it's going to take longer, right? So all of those other factors, we really have to have a historical knowledge of your student before you start thinking they can or cannot learn.
Absolutely. And so what would you recommend to teachers or to school psychologists to say to teachers when a student comes in with no English proficiency, no exposure to English? They, for example, only speak Spanish, and maybe a teacher sits them next to the one student in class who's bilingual and can translate the directions to them. But outside of those basic tips that teachers know, what are some great tips to give to teachers for those students who are just coming in with no English proficiency?
I think technology is a great tool, right? We have access to so many, apps on. We have computers in classrooms. We have so many things that kids have access to nowadays, and so many of those are bilingual tools, right? So yes, we use iReady here in Boston that have just short 10-minute sessions or 15-minute sessions in between classes. If the student finished the lesson, have them sit and listen and really develop vocabulary. For me, vocabulary is the key to success, right? So have that in your classroom, just a little station that the students can really develop and increase their vocabulary. 1. 2, we also have used here in Boston Nearpod, which is another app developed in Florida. And really, they create a lesson, the teacher's lesson, in the native language. So the student is sitting in your classroom listening to your lesson in their language. So he feels part of the class and he feels reintegrated, right? So there's so much technology out there. Bilingual books that kids could be reading in your classroom that really develop the English vocabulary. So for me, there's so much out there that teachers can do before we go to the special ed route.
Absolutely. And so another thing that I want to talk about is community resources here in Boston. Are there resources you'd recommend to parents to help support their children's English proficiency?
Oh, yes. We have public libraries give free English classes to families. So, of course, parents also need to learn the language. So going to the public libraries. Over the summer, we have free children's museum, free aquarium, free everything. So, taking advantage of that, right? Even free reading classes at the libraries. So going and listening to stories, right? Being outside, going for sailing classes, anything that exposes them to language.
Yes. And it sounds like even the social component too
Yes.
of going sailing, for example, could lead to having friends who are talking in the English language and motivating them to learn more English to be able to speak with their friends in English. And so that social component's important too, right?
And we also forget it goes both ways, right? So your monolingual friend will also learn Spanish,
Yes.
right? So those are really great strategies.
Absolutely. Another challenge that school psychologists often face is which language to test the student in when they are when they have limited exposure to English. In my districts in the past, we would use data such as WIDA scores to determine whether the student was proficient enough in English to be tested in English, or if they needed to be tested by a bilingual school psychologist in, for example, Spanish. And so how did they do it in the Boston Public Schools? What are the policies and procedures that you'd recommend?
So here we use, by rule of thumb, 1, 2s, and 3s, WIDA levels 1,
WIDA
2s.
scores,
Yes, the WIDA scores. Definitely a bilingual psych sees them first, right? Usually the 3s are those borderline cases, and so the school psych will see them and make that determination, right? We always test them in both languages, right? The 3s, because then the school psych will also talk to the speech and language person and say, what do you think, right? And the speech have their set of assessments as well. And we have them in Spanish or many times in other languages. But we're really trying to see what is the strongest language. What is the language that the student prefers? What is their academic language too? Because socially, the kid could be really strong, but the academic language is what we're seeking. Can they process the science language, the math language, right? And then we take it from there.
Do you ever consult with the speech language pathologist on what might be the dominant language when it might be a little bit ambiguous, which is the more
Yes.
dominant language?
Yes, yes. And so those 3s that can be borderline, we will always do, if we have doubt, we always go on the safer side and do it in both languages.
Got it. Thank you for clarifying that. So let's get into your evolution of your work as a leader. Could you talk about some of your important milestones? And I wanted to make sure I brought up too that Ivonne got an award very recently. She was spotlighted as one of the top leaders in Boston Public Schools, and she was featured on their latest newsletter for being a very well-renowned leader in Boston Public Schools. And so congratulations on that award. And why don't you talk about some of these important milestones and create, how you were able to make a significant difference for multilingual learners?
Well, it takes a village, right? And so Boston is a huge district. So I've made it my mission to talk to everyone I can, right? So I work with every department I can, right? The family engagement department. I work with, academics and special education, and whoever will listen to my speech, I will reach out, because it really takes everybody working together to move this work forward. And this is not something that we will ever completely fix, right? It takes constant work, and it takes constant shifting, because the Department of Education is constantly shifting our policies and our requirements, right? So we really have to bring us all to the table, right? And so I'm always pushing that envelope. And whenever something comes out, like equity and culturally sensitive material, I always say, and how about for English language learners? And is this translated in our 9 major languages? And I think we need to consider our English language learners, right? So I'm always there reminding people that there's a group of families in our city that need extra this or extra that, right? So that's why I think they decided, oh, well, she's always pushing this envelope.
Yes.
And
talk about those guidelines too, because you made
Yes.
really comprehensive guidelines for school psychologists and for educators in general on how to help support multilingual learners.
Yes. So those guidelines really give the school leaders and even the teachers the piece by piece, step by step what do I do when? If I have a doubt, where do I go? Who do I ask? Who in my building has the knowledge to help me, right? And that has been really, of course, it's now being edited because every so many years things change. Yes. Yeah. But it really is a work of art by so many people.
Do you want to give credit to some of the departments who worked on it, including yourself and this department? Who else was a part of this?
So, yes, the school committee's task force for English language learners, Dr. Maria Serpa, was one of our biggest creators, and she is a big part of the brains behind this project. She worked at Lesley University for many years. She says she's retired, but she really isn't. She's a huge advocate. She's written books and she does conferences throughout the nation, but also the family engagement and the related services providers with all their speech pathologists, their bilingual speech pathologists, the English language learners departments with their language team acquisition facilitators. So people and the ESL teachers, English as a second language teachers, so everybody who's really worked hard with the students and know the struggles to really get them to move forward. So it's a collaboration of so many people.
That's wonderful. So I have one last question for you. What keeps you hopeful? In a time when school mental health is so needed and often underutilized, what motivates you to keep pushing forward?
The kids, seeing them progress and seeing them move forward and seeing them graduate. Because once you reach that proficiency in English, you see how the bilingual kids really soar and they get better grades, they get better SAT scores than their monolingual counterparts. So yeah, bilingualism is their superpower, right? And these are kids who score, they might not get perfect SAT scores, but they get into those schools and they really are amazing students because they're really well balanced and they have a story to tell.
Yes, and resilience
too. Amazing kids.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Conversations with Boston School Psychologists, building safe and supportive schools one conversation at a time. Thank you so much to Dr. Ivonne Borrero for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And please follow us on our socials, Boston School Psychs, and visit our website, bostonschoolpsychs.com, to learn more about our work. Join our next conversation to learn more about resources and tips for creating safe and supportive schools. Thank you.